Iran, today, a name that echoes at the center of global tensions, a crucial player in the geopolitical chess game of the Middle East. But what if I told you that behind the headlines about nuclear deals and shadowy alliances lies a spiritual script written millennia ago? The truth is that the story of Iran, from its birth to its ultimate destiny, is not being decided today. It has already been recorded in the pages of the Bible. To unravel this mystery, we need to call this nation by its ancient name, Persia. And this is where the plot thickens, revealing a stunning paradox. The same nation that prophecy points to as a key player in the apocalyptic war of Gog and Magog, a coalition that will turn against Israel in the last days, was also the empire that God himself chose to free his people and finance the reconstruction of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. How is this possible? Can the same people be both an instrument of salvation and a prophetic enemy? Stay with me until the end, because today we will unveil a timeline that few know about, connecting current events to a divine plan drawn up from the beginning. And to understand Iran's future, we must first go back to its birth, the cradle of nations, the origin of Persia. Our story begins in a newborn world, cleansed by the waters of the Great Flood. Humanity had a new beginning, and all civilization began anew from a single family, that of Noah. His 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, became the patriarchs of all the peoples of the earth. It is in the book of Genesis that we find what is considered the world's first genealogical map, the Table of Nations. And it is in this genetic map of humanity that the Bible points to 2 key figures, 2 descendants of Noah, whose destinies would intertwine to form the future Persian Empire. The first is Madai, Noah's grandson through Japheth. His descendants, known as the Medes, would settle in the mountainous regions north of what is now Iran. The second name is Elam, son of Shem. His descendants, the Elamites, settled in the fertile plains of the southwest, near the Persian Gulf. Imagine the scene. In the same territory that would one day be Iran, 2 distinct peoples begin to grow. To the north, the Medes, a strong and resilient people forged by the cold of the mountains. To the south, the Elamites in a prosperous and strategic land, and it wasn't long before one of these peoples showed its military might. In Genesis chapter 14, the Bible recounts the first major international war ever recorded. A coalition of 4 kings from the east, including the powerful king of Elam, invaded the land of Canaan, pillaging cities and enslaving people. In the midst of the chaos, they captured a prisoner who would change the course of history, Lot, Abraham's nephew. Abraham, upon learning of this, did not hesitate. With only 318 of his trained servants, he pursued this powerful alliance of kings. In a daring strategic maneuver, he attacked them during the night, defeating them completely. He not only rescued Lot, but freed all the captives. It was a humanly impossible victory, an event that established a clear spiritual principle from the beginning. No power from the east, no matter how strong, can prevail against the people who have God's favor. But that defeat by Abraham was not the end of the Elamites. It was only the beginning. For centuries, as the great empires of Assyria and Babylon rose and dominated the world scene, the descendants of Elam and Madai continued to multiply. On the plains and mountains of ancient Iran, clans became tribes, and tribes became kingdoms. A new force was quietly forming, biding its time. And though they were pagan nations, they were never outside of God's sovereign plan. On the contrary, they were central to his future purposes. Centuries before their height, God revealed his plans through the prophet Isaiah, announcing a shocking prophecy. He would raise up the combined Medes and peoples of Elam as an instrument of judgment to punish arrogant Babylon, the same empire that would one day destroy Jerusalem and burn the temple. But the prophecy did not stop at judgment. There was a second, even more surprising part. God revealed that Persia would not only be his instrument of punishment, but also his instrument of deliverance. Through the mouth of Isaiah, God announced that a pagan king of Persia, who had not yet been born, would be his anointed one, chosen to free the people of Israel from exile and order the rebuilding of their temple. And then, with precision that defies history, Isaiah called him by name, Cyrus, more than 150 years before he existed. Both prophecies were fulfilled, and God's clock began to tick. With terrifying accuracy, history began to align with God's script. In the 7th century BC, the first major step was taken. A king named Deioces unified the Medes, founding the first imperial capital on Iranian territory, the city of Ecbatana. The foundation of the future empire was being laid exactly as foretold. The king's grandson, Cyaxares, would take the next step. He reformed the army, transforming it into a disciplined and fearsome war machine. His first great conquest was the destruction of Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, one of Israel's most brutal enemies. The prophecy was being fulfilled in stages. God was raising up Persia from within as an instrument of justice and eventually redemption. Persia, in Daniel's vision. But while Medo-Persian power was growing physically in the east, God was revealing its destiny spiritually, and he did so in the heart of the enemy empire. It all began when the Babylonian army, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, invaded Jerusalem, tore down its walls, and took thousands of captives. Among them was a young nobleman named Daniel. Torn from his homeland and forced to serve in the most powerful and corrupt court in the world, Daniel refused to defile himself. Because of his incredible faithfulness, in the midst of darkness, God gave him an extraordinary gift, the ability to receive and interpret prophetic visions. There, from within the Babylonian palace, Daniel began to see God's script for history, witnessing how he would topple empires and raise up new ones in their place. The first great revelation came from the king himself. Nebuchadnezzar was tormented by a dream so powerful that it shook his spirit. But when he woke up, the image had disappeared from his mind. In desperation, he summoned all the wise men of Babylon and made an impossible demand. They must not only interpret the dream, but first reveal what he had dreamed. When all failed and were condemned to death, Daniel was called. God's prophet was about to meet the most powerful king on earth. With an authority that came not from himself, but from heaven, Daniel first described the image in detail and then stated its significance. "You, O king, are the head of gold, but after you another kingdom will arise, with the breast and arms of silver." Daniel explained that the silver figure was not a single nation, but two arms, two powers intertwined in one body, the Medes and the Persians. The prophecy, however, contained a crucial detail. One arm would rise stronger than the other. The Persians would take control of the alliance. The prophecy was clear, and young Daniel, in a foreign land, was seeing the future that God had designed. And it was not long before this vision became reality, for the king that God had, announced through the prophet Isaiah, was about to arise in the highlands of Persia. His name was Cyrus. In a brilliant campaign, Cyrus the Persian conquered the kingdom of the Medes and united the two nations, forming the mighty Medo-Persian Empire. The prophecy of the two arms, with the Persian being the stronger, was fulfilled before the eyes of the world. Soon, Cyrus became the most powerful monarch of his time, and his insatiable empire finally set its sights on the great prize, Babylon itself. The prophesied day arrived, but not with a thunderous battle, but with an act of fatal hubris. Within the supposedly impenetrable walls of Babylon, King Belshazzar, grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, was holding a banquet for 1,000 of his nobles. In the midst of the feast, he committed an unforgivable act. He ordered the sacred vessels that his grandfather had stolen from the temple in Jerusalem to be brought out so that they could toast false gods. At the exact moment of that profane toast, the party stopped. The sound of the harps fell silent. Suddenly, the fingers of a human hand appeared out of nowhere and began to write an enigmatic message on the palace wall. The king turned pale, his knees trembled, and absolute terror took over the most powerful hall on earth. Once again, the wise men of Babylon proved powerless. No one could read the writing. So they brought in the old prophet Daniel. With the authority of one who serves a greater king, Daniel read and interpreted the divine sentence, Mene, God has numbered the days of his kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances of justice and found wanting. Parsin, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. While Daniel was still speaking, judgment was already being executed. Outside the walls, the armies of Cyrus the Persian had accomplished the unthinkable. They had diverted the waters of the Euphrates River and were marching silently across the dry riverbed, entering the city under the gates. The floodgates, which should have been locked, were divinely forgotten to be open. That very night, Belshazzar was killed. Babylon, the head of gold, had fallen. Daniel's prophecy was fulfilled to the letter. And with the fall of Babylon, Isaiah's prophecy of liberation came true. The Jews, who had lived in exile for 70 years, witnessed the impossible. Cyrus, the pagan king of Persia, officially decreed their return to Jerusalem. And he went further. He financed the rebuilding of the temple with the Persian treasury and gave royal authority to Zerubbabel, of the lineage of David, and to Joshua, the high priest, to lead the work. Thus, Persia fulfilled its role as a restorative nation, a unique act in ancient history. But God had given Daniel another vision of the empire, one even more visceral and aggressive. In a night vision, Daniel saw 4 gigantic beasts rising out of the sea. The second was like a bear, rearing up on one side and having 3 ribs between its teeth, and a voice commanded it, "Get up, devour much flesh." The bear was a representation of the Medo-Persian Empire. The detail of it being raised on one side was yet another prophetic confirmation that the Persian part of the alliance would dominate the Median part, and the 3 ribs in its mouth symbolized 3 specific and brutal conquests that would mark its expansion: the rich kingdom of Lydia, the already defeated Babylon, and the powerful empire of Egypt. This vision was fulfilled with mathematical precision. After Cyrus conquered Lydia and Babylon, his son Cambyses II led the Persian armies across the desert and defeated Pharaoh. Egypt, the ancient oppressor of Israel, fell under Persian rule. The 3rd rib was devoured, and the prophecy of the bear was completely fulfilled. But the revelations about Persia were not over. Years later, Daniel had another vision, even more specific and direct. On the banks of the Ulai River, he saw a ram with 2 horns. One of the horns was taller than the other, and the taller one grew last. This ram attacked west, north, and south, and no one could stand against it. Then a voice explained its meaning. The ram with 2 horns that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia. The image was a prophecy of Persian supremacy, repeated in 3 different forms. But Daniel's vision continued. Suddenly, from the west, a goat with a notable horn between its eyes advanced in fury, moving so fast that its feet barely touched the ground. It struck the ram with all its force, broke off its 2 horns, and trampled it mercilessly. It was a prophecy of the end of Persia, which would fall to the next empire, Greece, under Alexander the Great. But that prophesied end was still a long way off. At its height, Persia was the center of the known world, an invincible empire whose dominions stretched from India to Ethiopia. And it was at the heart of that power, in the imperial capital of Susa, during the reign of King Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes, that one of the greatest dramas of intrigue and salvation in the entire Bible unfolded: the Jewish queen and the hidden enemy. It all begins when King Ahasuerus, to flaunt the wealth of his empire, holds an extravagant 180-day banquet. At the climax of the feast, drunk on wine and power, he orders his wife, Queen Vashti, to present herself so that everyone can admire her beauty. Her refusal causes a scandal that shakes the empire, and the king, enraged, strips her of her title. The throne was vacant, and the king's advisors proposed a solution: an empire-wide beauty contest to find a new queen. Among the many young women brought to the palace was a Jewish orphan named Hadassah, raised by her cousin Mordecai, who instructed her to keep her heritage a secret. In the palace, she became known by her Persian name, Esther, and her beauty and grace were so exceptional that the king loved her above all others and crowned her Queen of Persia. While a Jewish woman reigned in the palace, in the shadows, a mortal enemy of her people rose to power. His name was Haman, a descendant of the Amalekites, the ancient and cursed enemy of Israel. The king promoted him to second most powerful man in the empire and decreed that all must bow before him. But Mordecai, Esther's cousin, refused, declaring that he would only kneel before his God. That act of defiance filled Haman with overwhelming hatred. His revenge would not be against Mordecai alone, but against his entire people. Manipulatively, he went to King Ahasuerus and described the Jews as a rebellious nation with its own laws, a danger to the empire. He convinced the king and, with the royal ring, sealed a death decree. On a specific date, all Jews in the empire, without exception, were to be annihilated. News of the decree plunged the Jewish people into despair. Mordecai in mourning sent an urgent message to Esther, begging her to intercede with the king. But Esther was in an impossible position. Persian law was absolute. Anyone who approached the king uninvited was put to death unless he, in mercy, extended his golden scepter. Knowing that it could be her death sentence, Esther made her decision: "If I perish, I perish." After asking all her people to fast with her, she donned her royal robes and broke the law by presenting herself before the king. The moment was tense, but God gave her favor in the eyes of Ahasuerus, who held out his scepter. In a stroke of strategic genius, she did not reveal her request, but invited the king and Haman to a private banquet, and then to a second banquet the next day. The trap was being set. It was at the second banquet, at the exact moment she had prepared, that the king asked again, "What is your petition, Queen Esther?" And she struck the blow. "If I have found favor in your eyes, O king, spare my life and the lives of my people, for we have been sold to be destroyed." The king, shocked, asked who would dare do such a thing. Esther pointed and declared, "The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman." The king's fury was relentless. On the same gallows that Haman had prepared for Mordecai, he himself was hanged. The enemy was dead, but his murderous law was still in force, and by the immutable law of the Medes and Persians, a decree sealed with the king's ring could not be revoked. So Esther and Mordecai, now in Haman's place, came up with a brilliant solution. They did not annul the first law, but had the king sign a new law, which gave the Jews the legal right to assemble, arm themselves, and defend themselves against anyone who tried to attack them. The day that was set for extermination arrived and became the day of victory. In every province of the empire, the Jews fought and prevailed against their enemies. Mourning turned into celebration, and the Persian Empire, without knowing it, became once again a refuge, a throne, and a shield for the people of God. Persia, at the birth of Jesus. After the miracle at Susa, Persia seems to fade from the center stage of Scripture. Empires rise and fall, and Rome takes over. But Persia's silence was not the end. Centuries later, as the world waited for the Messiah to come, it returned to the scene. In the Gospel of Matthew, we read a famous passage, "And behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east, and are come to worship him." But who exactly were these magicians? The original word from the Greek magoi does not refer to illusionists, but to an influential caste of priests, sages, and astronomers from the region of the East. And although the text does not specify their nation, most scholars agree that they came from the lands of the ancient Persian Empire, that is, the region of modern-day Iran. How would they have known that a particular star heralded the birth of the King of the Jews? The most likely answer takes us back to a familiar face, Daniel. Centuries earlier, Daniel had been the chief wise man in Babylon and Persia. It is very likely that his writings and prophecies, especially those pointing to the coming of the Messiah, were preserved as a treasure by this same caste of wise men who succeeded him. They weren't just following a star, they were following a prophecy. In the book of Daniel, chapter 9, there is a mathematically precise prophecy that sets out a timeline for the arrival of the Messiah, the Prince. The Persian Magi, familiar with these texts, knew that the time was near. The star was the final sign, the heavenly confirmation that the prophecy was coming true. That is why they traveled so far and with such certainty. And when they found the child, they bowed in worship and offered him gifts of powerful symbolism. Gold, in recognition of his royalty. Frankincense, a resin burned in the temple acknowledging his divinity. And myrrh, a spice used in burials, prophetically anticipating his death and sacrifice. In that moment, Persia, which had one day restored the temple, became the first foreign nation to recognize and worship the king. Iran's journey in the Bible, up to this point, has been a mirror of redemption. But its story does not end in Bethlehem. Biblical prophecy holds a final dark chapter for the nation of Persia, one that fulfills the other side of the paradox. God has not only revealed its beginning and its redemptive role, he has also announced its involvement in one of the most feared end-time prophecies, the end-time covenant. In the book of the prophet Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, God reveals a terrifying vision. He describes a great coalition of nations that, in the last days, will rise up to attack the nation of Israel, now restored to its land. The prophecy says, Persia, Cush, and Put with them, all with shield and helmet. The first name on the list of allies is explicit, Persia, today's Iran. The prophecy details the other, members of this military alliance. The leader is Gog of the land of Magog, which many scholars identify as a reference to the region of modern-day Russia and the nations of Eurasia. The other partners mentioned are Cush, the region of Ethiopia and Sudan, Put, corresponding to Libya and North Africa, Gomer and Togarmah, peoples of the region of modern-day Turkey. It is a northern military alliance of African and Middle Eastern nations. Ezekiel describes the attack as an advancing storm, like a cloud covering the land, an overwhelming military force, but according to the prophecy, they will not succeed. This attack is not against a mere army, it is against God himself, and it will provoke his direct and overwhelming intervention with fire and judgment. God's purpose, according to the text, is clear. I will be magnified and sanctified, and I will make myself known in the eyes of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord. And so the Bible shows us the complete trajectory of Persia, from a redeeming nation to a judged nation. Its fate seems sealed the moment it joins the alliance against Israel. But is this the definitive end for the Iranian people in God's plan? Or even in the judgment, is there a promise of hope? The answer lies in an often forgotten prophecy. The prophet Ezekiel describes the outcome of Gog's war in devastating terms. The invading army will be annihilated on the mountains of Israel by fire from heaven. The destruction will be so great that it will take 7 months to bury the dead and 7 years to burn the war material. As a key member of the alliance, Persia will not escape this judgment. But here is where we find a disconcerting twist. Centuries before Ezekiel, the prophet Jeremiah recorded a specific prophecy about Elam, the ancient region that is the heart of southwestern Iran. The prophecy has 2 parts. First, the judgment. Behold, I will break the bow of Elam, the chief of their might. But then comes the promise. Yet in the latter days I will restore the fortunes of Elam, declares the Lord. This is a double prophecy, and it changes everything. It tells us that although Iran's military might will be broken because it stands against God, its people's history will not end in ashes. The promise that God will restore the fortunes of Elam in the last days means that even after the judgment of Gog's war, there is a future and a redemption planned for the Iranian people. Okay, let's move on to the conclusion and closing of the script. The story is impressive. From the first pages of Genesis, when God sowed the tribes of Madai and Elam, Persia was there. It was the empire that liberated Israel, the kingdom that protected the Jewish people through Esther, and the nation whose wise men first worshipped the Messiah. It will be the nation that will rise up in the final war, but also the nation to whom God promised an unexpected restoration. The biblical story of Persia is therefore a warning to empires that defy God, but also a promise to peoples who repent. The Bible says that in the last days, survivors of the nations that came against Jerusalem will rise up to worship the Lord. Perhaps among these redeemed nations, we will see the people of Iran, ancient Elam, finally restored to peace. Now the question comes back to you. After seeing this entire prophetic journey, do you believe that today's Iran is fulfilling its biblical role? Are the events and alliances we see in the news shadows of these ancient prophecies coming true? Leave your thoughts in the comments box below. If this study was valuable to you, please click the like button and share it, as it shows us that we should continue exploring these connections. And if you want to delve even deeper into the prophecies that Daniel left us, click now on the video that is appearing on your screen, where we reveal the keys to understanding the end times. Don't stop seeking understanding. Stay with God, and until next time.